darlings, and welcome to the first ever episode of Phantasmic, with me, your hostess for the show, Lady Macabre. Now, I do have a brief introduction for not only this podcast, but also myself. And because of those brief introductions, this episode will be longer than most. Maybe. The future of this show is actually quite dependent on you, dear listener. But before I explain how, allow me to tell you a bit about the show, yeah? Phantasmic, yes, with a little squiggle, is going to be primarily spooky, with me telling 3 scary stories from around the web, dealing in all things paranormal. Ghosts, aliens, psychic abilities, even cryptids and true crime. And of course, I'll be giving my thoughts and opinions on the validity or scariness of the story after reading them. I do not claim to read the script perfectly. However, this podcast is intended for a mature audience. You see, there will actually be a few special episodes of Phantasmic, ones that discuss some rather adult games, of a lewd nature or horror nature to be exact. The ghost stories may seem lighthearted, but please be aware that my target audience is, in fact, adults. Disclaimer aside, I'm hoping that this explanation was also enough of a hint as to why Phantasmic. Now, I'm your hostess, Lady Macabre. I've always been fascinated by scary stories, and even have a few ghost stories of my own, which I'll only start sharing once this podcast gains 500 fans. I know, it's an ambitious goal for right off the bat, but what can I say? I just swing like that. That was a pun, very much intentional. I suppose some general quick facts about me would be that orchids are my favorite flower. I have a pretty major sweet tooth, and I just so happen to be a literal Hellspawn. Now, to finally circle back to this podcast being reliant on you, my darling listeners, besides your general support, there is a pretty major way that you guys can help me. You see, I can't dig up the most terrifying stories alone. So, have a story you'd like to share? Whether it's your own personal experience or something you saw online, please submit it to luckymsfortune@gmail.com. Again, that's luckymsfortune@gmail. Now, without further ado, let's get into our first story. This story comes from BayAreaEntertainer.com, specifically an article covering 3 scary stories to tell around a campfire. Of those 3, this one got to me the most. So, let's find out. Was it people, or was it aliens? The original storyteller, Doug Averill, 2nd generation owner and manager of the Flathead Lake Lodge. Doug Averill grew up as one of 8 boys on his parents' sprawling dude ranch, the Flathead Lake Lodge in rural Montana. As a teen, the Averill boys ran wild. We rode around as a little gang of cowboys, he remembers. They'd saddle up and head off to check cattle on the 3 giant tracts of land the family managed, which formed a triangle around some of the state's most remote rangelands. One summer, in the 1960s, the brothers came across a ghastly sight. There, on the ground, were 3 dead cows, neatly arranged in a circle. No obvious wounds were visible, but their reproductive organs had been removed. There was never any blood. It was almost surgical removal, Averill remembers. During this decade, America was obsessed with aliens, and write-ups in the local newspapers posited that perhaps this was the work of extraterrestrials. People mused that aliens had taken the reproductive organs for testing. But one day, Avril and his friends came across a lance in their path. Attached to it was a cryptic note with a threatening message. "That's when we thought it's gotta be people doing this," he says. Then things got really strange. Over the next few days, a series of odd events unfolded. First, the brothers stopped in at their local bar to grab a hamburger, leaving their horses in the back of a stock truck. The horses were packed in tightly, and the Avrils were only gone for a few minutes. When they came back, the horse packed into the middle of the truck was mysteriously out, with no signs of struggle. "We had no idea how they possibly could have gotten that horse unloaded without unloading all the others," he says. The next day, a new wrangler on the ranch fell off his horse and was badly injured. They'd all been riding together, but not a single other member of the crew saw the accident. It was the weirdest thing, Avril says. The man's injuries were so severe that he was left permanently disabled. Finally, the last terrible thing happened. An old camp cook drove out to meet the brothers and ride for a day. But when he arrived, the tailgate on his stock truck had somehow gone missing, and even though it had been there when he loaded up, his horse, Betsy, had fallen out of the truck and been dragged behind the vehicle for who knows how long. They had to put her down on the spot. To be honest, it just killed him to see what happened to Betsy. We probably should have put him down too, remembers Avril. Those 3 events were just boom, boom, boom. 3 things in a row that were so weird, all tied together, because they were right after we saw that spear, he remembers. 3 things, like the 3 dead cows left in a circle. Avril used to tell his stories from that summer around the campfire quite a lot. But over the years, he's gotten new stories, and they've been shifted out of rotation. Besides, they're awfully grim. But he recently got a call about a downed bull, a buffalo. It was out in one of the most remote parts of his ranch. A neighbor had seen a pack of 16 wolves, and normally, wolves don't bother buffalo, but 16 of them? I thought, well, maybe. He went to investigate. There, lying in a snow-covered field, was the bull. But there were no bullet holes, or teeth marks, or gashes in its corpse. Even stranger, scavenging animals and birds hadn't touched it. Not even the buzzards, which is really unusual, he says. One other thing was amiss. Its reproductive organs were gone, and there wasn't a single footprint in the snow around it, or anywhere along the mile-long walk into the ranch from the nearest road. Ask Avril whether he thinks he's dealing with aliens or humans, and he'll tell you he's pretty sure it's humans. But I'd rather it was aliens, he adds. After that summer back in the 60s, seeing what humans were capable of, he'd pick aliens any day. Not that I can blame him. If that was really the work of humans, let's just say my little faith in humanity is dwindling even more. Honestly, I can't help but think that must be some cruel form of prank born out of pure boredom. And that's why this story gets under my skin. If not aliens, then why would a human ever need to, or even feel compelled to, for this matter, do any of that? Cows' reproductive organs specifically? Or what about that cryptic and threatening message attached to a damn lance? I have so many questions, and yet I'm almost scared I don't really want the answers. So, how about we move on to our next story? This story was actually submitted to me by a Twitter user, Sexy Hentai. Shout out to the throwback scares with this one, fair warning, but I assure you, it holds up. Now, for the story about the licked hand. A dog is a very loyal creature, protective even. They tune in with their humans' needs and do their best to comfort and accompany and protect as they see fit. And when you add a child into the mix, the two can and often do form an inseparable bond. In this case, we're telling the tale of a young girl and her collie. One night, her parents left for a little date night out. They warned her before they left to make sure she had all the doors and windows shut tight before bed, as well as the standard make sure you get to bed on time just for good measure. However, with the young girl being no older than 8, she struggled with one of the windows in the basement. Not that she liked being done there anyway. She barely managed to get it shut before realizing the lock was even tougher. She tried and tried for as long as her little arms and paranoia let her before giving up and running back upstairs to heat up the food her mom left out for her and to feed her collie. After dinner, she and the dog did a quick double check on all the doors and windows, except that one basement window. Not wanting to struggle again, she decided that the door's deadbolt lock would be plenty protection if someone did somehow get in through that window. Feeling like her home was secure, she finally brushed her teeth and got ready for bed. "Here, boy," she called the collie into the room after her, where he took up his usual spot at the side of her bed as she climbed in. Turning off the lamp always scared her because of how dark her room would suddenly get, but she had learned that her dog would comfort her if she just put her hand down and let him lick it. "Good night, boy. Sweet dreams." She smiled as the dog comforted her as her eyes adjusted. With the roll to face the opposite side, she finally fell asleep. But shortly during her rest, she woke with a start. A bad dream, perhaps? As she lay there, trying to get her mind calm and back into a sleepy state, she noticed the sound of water dripping. Since it sounded like it was coming from the bathroom, just across the hall, she figured she must have not turned the faucet all the way. So, she got up and fixed the dripping noise. Yet, she was still feeling nervous as she lay back in bed. Sticking her hand over the edge of her bed, her dog gave her his comforting lips, easing her into sleep once more. However, she woke once again about 2 hours later to the steady sound of dripping. And being certain she'd fully shut the faucet last time, she chose to try and ignore the sound, sticking her hand over the side of the bed for more licks, which she was thankful to receive. Back to dreamland she went, and stayed until she heard her parents' car pull in around 2:20 a.m. Having been nervous most of the night without them, she sat up, noticing that the dog wasn't by her bed. Shrugging it off, she got up and went to the bathroom, rubbing her sleepy eyes. A blood-curdling scream escaped her once she opened her eyes, though. Her collie dog was hanging from the curtain rod, which had been moved to be centered in the tub. He had been skinned, and the dripping sound she'd heard the second time certainly wasn't the faucet. No, it was her dog's blood, dripping and pooling in the tub below him. Running back to her room, she noticed a piece of paper laying on what used to be her dog's bed, a note seeming to be written in blood. Humans can look too. I could not imagine being in that kind of scenario. How horrifyingly fucked up, right? This story has been told many times, many ways, and admittedly even I gave it some embellishments, but it still makes my skin crawl. This is why I don't let anything hang over the side of my bed. I'm kidding. Sorta. As far as if I believe the story, not at all. But it's still creepy and unnerving, having stuck with me years after I first heard it. Hopefully I can inspire others to keep this one alive with me. But it's time for our third and final story for the night. A classic favorite of mine, written by Edgar Allan Poe. The Telltale Heart, as read off of poemuseum.org. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I'm mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly, I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually. I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch on his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all close, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, for the hinges creaked, I undid it, just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed. And so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So, you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than it did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he did not even dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no, his room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were closed and fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and I was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. In the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up in my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say, I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket that has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with all these suppositions, but he had found it all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but every cuteness of the senses? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. The beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. Now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had cut it all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. But as the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking on the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police offices, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own urging. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things, but ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder! And still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard! They suspected! They knew! They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, hark! Louder, 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 louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. Such a classic, no? I've always loved the slow burn, the genuine build-up throughout the story. And as one who has experienced some nervous breakdowns and anxiety attacks, I can honestly say that reading this as an adult gives me more chills solely because of the way Poe writes the story. It's so well done that it almost begs me to remember how those times felt. This probably won't be the only thing I cover from Poe, so I'd love to hear what everyone's favorite story or poem is from him. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen in on the first ever episode of Phantasmic. I hope you enjoyed your time here as much as I did, and remember, if you have any submissions for scary stories you'd like to hear next, please send them to luckymsfortune@gmail.com. That's luckymsfortune@gmail, or hit me up on Twitter @misfortune4. That's @MSFORTUNE and the number 4. Until next time, don't forget to check on those shadows moving behind you, and remember, not every paranormal experience is an illusion. Good night.